Hey everybody, welcome to Jacob's Quest, and last night I saw Oppenheimer, the much anticipated Christopher Nolan movie, of course running right up against Barbie, making it the Barbenheimer weekend. I've already done my review of Barbie, I've already seen that one, it was really fun. And Oppenheimer is a 3-hour biographical thriller kind of story about, you know, this guy who led the Manhattan Project and the nuclear bomb creation and all that stuff, right? Now, I do not fully know the actual history of these events. You know, I've heard the guy's name, I know the general, like, yeah, there was a Manhattan Project and we created the bomb and, you know, Hiroshima, Nagasaki and all that. Like, I know, like, the bare basics of the history, but, you know, and like, on purpose, I did not go, you know, Wikipediaing, you know, everything that happened here, because I kind of wanted to see how well the movie would actually be able to translate everything that's happening here, right? Like, how good can the movie communicate to me the full scope of this story, because a lot of stuff happens here. Like, the movie's 3 hours long, and I still feel like, you know, like, I kind of remember most of the people's names because they introduced so many different scientists and admirals and generals and people, military personnel, and I'm like, okay, there's a lot of characters, and this movie is skipping back and forth between time, like Christopher Nolan loves to do. You know, his non-linear storytelling, and so for the most part, the movie does a great job of, like, you know, informing you, especially like someone like me. Like, on purpose, I did not look anything up, so I had no idea what the actual history was. And I feel like I was able to follow along perfectly fine, right? Like, I wasn't really too confused. And honestly, the pacing of this movie, for the most part, and we're gonna get into it, for the most part is amazing, right? Like you would think just this biographical film about this scientist, and eventually they get to the Manhattan Project and the big Trinity test, right? Like, you would think that this would be hard to keep exciting, especially for 3 hours, because this is supposed to be a big blockbuster weekend, and general audiences have to get invested in, honestly, what on paper might be somewhat of a boring subject, because it's not like a superhero movie, you know, there's not like big action sequences or anything, but he manages to keep that pacing consistent. He manages to keep, like, the thrill of it, the intensity of, like, it basically every single time there's like a quiet moment, they will cut to a sudden image of particles in the universe, and you know, like, talking about the atoms bursting and explosions, and, you know, like, he does a great job of, like, basically constantly reminding the audience what's at stake here, what they're about to do, because, you know, we live in a world, especially me who's only in his 30s, it's like the bomb has always existed in my lifetime. I've never known a world before the bomb, you know, and so this movie does a great job of kind of putting you in that place of, like, oh, that's right, at some point in time the world was not capable of destroying itself. Like, human beings could not have done this before, and then after this happens, of course, now we could do it, you know what I mean? And so, like it kind of, like, you have to adjust your way of thinking as you're watching the movie. You're like, oh, that's right, these people don't live there yet. Like, I've lived here my whole life, where it's like, yeah, especially back in the 80s, the Cold War and all that stuff, like, you know, I've heard the stories about, like, you know, how many close calls there came to, like, someone pressing the button, right? Like, so it's just kind of funny to, like, you have to readjust yourself and be like, oh, that's right, these people in the movie, they're living in a history where this has never happened. You know, we've never had this capability as human beings. Like, the idea of, you know, if you set off 10 of these things around the globe, it's over, you know, like, that's never been a thought. And of course, you know, it goes down, like, this really dark path of, like, oh, we're gonna bring peace by creating this ultimate weapon, which, you know, you say that out loud, we're gonna bring peace by creating an ultimate weapon. It's like, of course, in hindsight, us very much being Monday morning quarterbacks as it is, right? Like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, that's just gonna make things worse and even more scary, which of course it did, right? Like, it just made things more scary. Did it, you know? And of course, it's a controversial subject, and I know a lot of people, a lot of history buffs, some of them will be like, no, it totally ended the war, and then other people and they dive into this in the movie, and I'm proud of this. Like, this movie is not like a the bomb was good and Oppenheimer did a great thing for America. Like, it does not take that firm stance of like, yeah, go America, we did it. It's like they fully address like, hey, Japan was kind of about to surrender. Germany had already surrendered. The war was almost over. But then other people are like, yeah, but we saved so many lives by not having to invade Japan like that, and then it's like, like they go into the discussions of it. Now, even though they do that, and I congratulate them on like fully embracing the very, very complicated nature of this project and this history, and the terrible things that came from this. Lots of people died horrible deaths, civilians, not soldiers, civilians, like, so yeah. They tackle a lot of heavy subjects on this, but it does mainly focus around Oppenheimer, and I've seen some criticism of that, because even though they mention the civilians and they mention how bad he feels about it later on in his life, they don't show any of that. You know what I mean? Like, they don't show the people that were really impacted by everything that happened here. It just kind of sticks with Oppenheimer, and I've seen criticisms of that, and it's up to you to decide whether that's a fair criticism or not, because this is about this guy. Like, the name of the movie is this guy, so I don't know. But I do congratulate them on like attempting to tackle the heaviness of this subject, because if you had given this to like Michael Bay in the 90s, this would have been just, pro-America, we did it, we're awesome kind of thing, you know what I mean? And they didn't do that here. Like, they almost immediately after the Trinity test, and then we hear about the bombs happening and over the radio, and it kind of like the gravity of the situation sets in. And then of course we tackle Oppenheimer later in life and how he starts to kind of immediately regret what just happened. And he has, this is revealed way later, but he has this conversation with Einstein about how, like, did we set up a chain reaction that's going to destroy the world one day? Like, did we, like, were we not ready for this kind of thing? So you kind of just see like how much this weighed on him, right? So the movie, for the most part, it does all of this really masterfully, right? And it tries to envelop this guy's entire life. And to be honest, I could easily see a cut of this movie that is another 5 hours long, right? Like they easily could have just expanded this thing. This could have been like a 10-part, hour-long episode series, But in any case, yeah, the pacing is really good. They managed to be in there pretty consistent. I will say, and this is really my only main criticism of this movie, is that the third act kind of veers almost into an entirely different story, because it's after World War II ends. It's like decades later. I don't know how many decades later, but it's a long time has passed, and Oppenheimer has kind of become this guy who's like, hey, we don't need to ramp up our nuclear expansion and try to just keep the race going, because the Cold War has definitely started, and then we have Admiral Strauss? I think that's what his name was. Anyways, they have this guy played by Robert Downey Jr., who's great, by the way. Everyone in this cast is great. Like, I feel like this goes without saying. The cast and the music and the cinematography, like, all that's amazing. I feel like I don't even need to say that, but it is. Anyways, so the third act is really all about, one, they're interviewing Oppenheimer to try and take away his security clearance because he has past ties to communism, and of course we're in the middle of the Red Scare now with the Soviets, and that whole situation is happening. And so now basically Oppenheimer went from being this golden boy in the public image of like, oh my god, he's the guy who, pro-America, yay, but then later on it's like, oh wait, your brother was in the Communist Party and you used to date this girl who was also a communist. I don't know if we can trust you, guy. Like, what if you had all of these spies? What if you were giving information to the Russians? And so of course it gets like real paranoid, and that's just the time that they were living in. And then basically you have this hearing where this guy Strauss, who was the one who kind of pitted everyone against Oppenheimer and like leaked all this stuff about his past communist ties, and they're in a hearing where he's gonna be I don't even know what the position was, but some presidential cabinet. He was going to be like really high up there, involved with, was it Eisenhower? I don't know. Again, I didn't look up the actual history of this. I'm trying to remember this from what the movie told me. Anyways, basically it's a hearing seeing if he can be accepted into this, and one of the other scientists who was with Oppenheimer kind of goes to bat for Oppenheimer and be like, hey, this guy, he leaked all this information to get Oppenheimer's security clearance gone, and we, you know, all this personal grudge stuff, and he's like real bitter about it and all this stuff, right? So basically that guy does not get entered into this presidential cabinet. I don't know what ends up happening to him, but he just doesn't get what he wanted, right? So it's sort of this like victory, you know, 3 parts removed for Oppenheimer, kind of like, okay, this guy screwed him over, but now he's getting screwed over because everyone knows what you did to Oppenheimer, guy. Everyone knows that you leaked all this information about his communist ties, right? Anyways, and that's kind of what the third act is. And my big criticism is really just like, it's such a, it feels like such a left turn. Like we climaxed at the Trinity test, and then immediately afterwards we kind of go into like Oppenheimer's like regrets and the, you know, all the heaviness of that situation, and it feels like that's kind of where the movie should have ended, on that note. But then we go into this other like 30-minute segment of the hearings and the interviews, and don't get me wrong, like there's great stuff there, but it feels like there's like a shift, and then the movie attempts to ramp back up into a climax, and we finally get like this conversation between Oppenheimer and Einstein. It's like a flashback to earlier, and I don't know, it just kind of, it feels like the movie had to revamp up to a climax because it was about to end. And honestly, that's just my main thing, is like, it feels like we could have ended this with just a 2.5-hour movie, and it would have been pretty solid. So I don't know. I know not everyone's going to agree with that. Everyone's going to be like, no, the interviews and that whole thing was really important. But I feel like that kind of messed with the pacing of the ending. So while most of the movie I found really riveting and paced very well, I do think the ending was kind of struggling to land, you know what I mean? It feels like it's like I clicked on a different link on Wikipedia and I started reading all about these hearings and these interviews, and I'm like, okay, but like the juice of the story kind of happened 30 minutes ago. Like that's kind of where the movie should have ended, maybe, just for the sake of that. So I don't know. That's just my opinion. I know not everyone's going to agree. Everyone's going to, you know, I feel like that's going to be the main thing that gets argued about. Everyone's going to be like, I don't know about that third act. Like, it definitely just, it feels like a different story had to start and end within that last act of the movie. So I don't know. That's just me. But anyways, overall, Oppenheimer, it was great. It definitely made me want to go look up a bunch of information about the real life situation. Like, it got me curious. It got me asking a whole bunch of questions about, like, well, what happened to this guy? What happened to this thing? You know, like, yeah, they talk about the hydrogen bomb a little bit that happened afterwards, and this other scientist was trying to make that, and they go into a lot of different stuff. So if anything else, it made me curious about history, and I want to know more about the real life situation. So that's not a bad thing. Yeah, Oppenheimer, I thought it was really well done. If not, you know, maybe need just one little edit at the end there, but that's just my opinion. Anyways, let me know what you guys think about Oppenheimer, and which one won the weekend for you. Was it Barbie or Oppenheimer? Let me know in the comments. All right, bye.